Hey, I'm Kevin Mendenhall. Today we're going to do part 2 of how to calculate headers, beams, and footers, and we're going to explain a little bit more about how loads travel. In part 1, we explained how the roof load got from the roof to a girder truss over to the wall and then down to a pier footer, which we sized manually, and we explained about soil bearing pressure. And in this episode, in this part, we're going to do the exact same thing with that same scenario, but we're going to do it with a software called Vitruvius StruCalc. And we're also going to calculate a beam in StruCalc, and then we're also going to place a point load on that beam and kind of explain a little bit more about that. So if you get value out of my videos, I'd appreciate it if you like and subscribe. I have a lot of really cool stuff coming up in the future. Got a whole lot planned. So with all that said, let's jump into the software and then we'll calculate some headers, beams, and footers. Span from the girder to the wall is 29 feet 3 inches, and the span of our girder is 22 feet. So we divide both of those in half. It works out to be about 14 foot 8 inches, and the girder, half of the girder, is 11 feet. That gives us about 162 square feet. And that is times the multiplier that I use. I always use 60 pounds per square foot of roof, and I explained that a little bit in part 1. So I'm going to take that times 60 pounds. As I mentioned before, we're going to round that up. I'm going to go ahead and round that up to 10,000 pounds is the load that I'm going to place on this footer. And of course, you have 10,000 pounds here. You're also going to have 10,000 pounds to the other side of this girder. So you figure one, you pretty much have them both. So I'm going to bring StruCalc up over here. And right here, we're going to drop this down and we're going to select isolated footing. I'm just going to click OK. I'm not going to save this, so I'm not going to name anything. The software will print up some very nice detailed calculations if you ever need to show the building department the long form calculations, but in my case I just use it to do the calculations, and I don't typically save. So in our case, our concentrated load is inside a 2x6 wall, and this is showing a column width of 4 inches, 4x4 basically. So we are going to change that to 6 inches in both directions. As I mentioned in part 1, that I always go 12 inches deep on the pier footer. The reason for that is it's exactly 1 foot deep. That way it's a little easier. If you have to do manual calculations, then you have you're working more in cubic feet or fractions of a cubic foot, so it's just a little easier to figure that way. So now in StruCalc, it's going to ask us to input the size of the footer that we want. So you have to do a little bit of a decimal equivalence in this field here. So our footer, when we manually calculated it, was 2 foot 8, so the decimal equivalent of that is 2.66. So we're just going to put that in here. So as you can see, our footer is not quite 2 foot 8 by 2 foot 8. It's 2 foot 7 and 59/64. Doesn't get much closer than that, honestly. If there is a way to convert this within StruCalc to feet and inches rather than fractions of a foot, I have not found that. So moving on, as we spoke of before in part 1, our soil bearing pressure in our area is 1,500 pounds per square foot. We're going to use a concrete strength of 2,500 psi, and that's it. That's our basically everything that I put in. I leave the defaults of 40,000 psi for the yield strength, 3 inches for the reinforcement bar cover, and the reinforcement bar size is number 4 rebar, pretty standard in residential construction. So I just leave that as it is and leave all the rest of the defaults. Down here where it says loads, you have the option to put in live loads, dead loads, and I just I put my total weight here, and we rounded up to 10,000 pounds total. And then we're going to come up here and we're going to go to calculate. So as you can see, the manual calculation that I did in part 1 and this calculation that I've done in StruCalc here is also adequate, which just reinforces that my calculations were correct. I did calculate heavy, meaning that for a tile roof, I could have gotten by with 55 pounds per square foot. I bumped that up to 60 pounds per square foot. And then I also bumped the result of our square footage, which was 9,600 and some odd pounds, and I bumped that up to 10,000. So with all those little adjustments, we're still well within our required footing size. So we're good here. Everything is lit up green at the bottom, as you can see. And if I'll just do an adjustment here, we'll do the soil bearing pressure. We'll call that 1,000 and recalculate. And now you can see that this footer is no longer adequate. So that's why it's important to find out what your soil bearing pressure is in your area. And again, I went into more detail on this in the other video. So with all that said, this is how I do footers. We'll move on and we'll do a beam. So I'll move this out of the way. We'll come back into Revit and we will calculate this beam on our roof here. You can't see it because it's inside some stucco, but I'll expose this for you. There's the beam that we're going to be looking at. So I need to get the measurement of this beam. So we'll go back to our floor plan, and this is where that beam actually is. I'm going to pull that dimension. All right. So our beam length is 12 feet, and we need to find our tributary. So I'm going to measure the overall width, and that is 19 feet 6. So for the beam, it's a little bit different. We have weight that is going to travel along that beam uniformly. It's called a uniform load. So if we go back here, so this weight from our ridge, in this case our tributary is at our ridge, it's half the span of the truss, and that weight is going to travel, and we're going to calculate this beam as there's a certain amount of weight that lands on this beam consistently all the way through from front to back. So our span was just under 20 feet. We're going to call that 10 feet. We're just going to round up. So we'll open up StruCalc again. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go down to roof beam right here. I'm going to click on that. I'm just going to leave the default name, click OK. Okay, so now we have a nice little diagram of a beam here, and down here at the bottom you can see that we have our spans and loads. I'm going to click on span. The span of our beam, which is from that column to the building, is 12 feet. So I'm going to put that in. Sorry, top field length, and then that'll change for us. So you can see this white box here, that indicates the load, one of them. So this is our live load right here, and you can see that at the bottom that the start of the load is at 0 feet, the end is at 10 feet. We don't want that. We change that to 12 here, and it doesn't automatically update, so we have to make that 12 feet here also. And now you can see that travels the length of the beam. And just for the sake of our demonstration today, I'm going to break this into live and dead loads. Typically I just put all the weight into live, but to show you how it's actually broken down, we'll go ahead and split it. And we're going to jump over into Revit onto my notes page, and you can see that I have it split here. The live load is 30 pounds per square foot. Dead load is 15. It's 25 if it's tile. That's where I said that would be a total of 55 pounds per square foot. So in our case, as I mentioned, I always bump up to 60. So we're going to put these numbers into StruCalc, and so we're going to do a little bit of math here. Our magnitude is, that's going to be how much weight is on this beam per foot. So as I mentioned, we're for our live load is 30 pounds per square foot of roof. Our tributary is 10 feet. Okay, so that's 300 pounds. So now we're going to add a uniform load right here. In the real world, if we were using our multiplier of 25 pounds per square foot for the dead load, this would be 250 pounds. This is kind of known as value engineering, when you're sizing things just to be just adequate. This is going to be a dead load. We're going to click add. Now we're going to go up here. This is going to be a glue lam beam. So we're going to select our glue lams. We're going to drop this down. We're going to go to 24F-1.8E, and we're going to select our 24F V4 Doug fir. I always use these settings for glue lams. Now they're asking you for what size beam do you want. I'm going to use a 5.5 inch wide glue lam, and I'm just going to try a 9, and then we're going to hit calculate, see how that works. And that's plenty. If I wanted to get it down a little bit, I can drop that depth down, and you can see we're just at 2%. So then that's our beams and headers, because if you look at a building, a header is really just a beam that's inside a wall. So there's one more scenario quickly that I want to go over with you, and there's not an example in this project, but say for instance this girder truss landed on this beam, and so there's a beam right here. If this girder truss landed on this beam, that would make that point load land on this beam, and then it would have to travel each way. So for our purposes, we'll just pretend that girder lands here. If we go back to Vitruvius StruCalc, we can add a point load. So we'll click that, and of course it gives you the option again that of live and dead. You can break them up if you want. So it's asking you how much weight is landing on that point load. In our case was 10,000 pounds. We're going to call that, we'll just say it's right in the center of the beam, and that's in our case that beam isn't actually 12 feet long as we have here, but by hovering over these you can see the arrows, and that's where our point load is. It's landing right on that beam there. So we're going to beef this up a bit, because it's definitely going to have to be much larger with the 10,000 pound point load right in the middle of it. This is probably going to even be inadequate. We're going to hit calculate. No, it does work actually. So that's how you design a beam with a point load. And if you were to go to print preview, then you can see that there's all the necessary information that the building department may need, and it's kind of a nice diagram that you can hand out with your plans to prove that that it's structurally sound. Once again, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.